So I would like to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Sherry Warren. I met Sherry when she did the training for our facilitators for the Our Whole Lives Sexuality and Faith program. And I've taken now all the age group facilitator trainings. Our conference in 2022 passed a resolution that I submitted saying that we would adopt this as a sexuality training for our conference. We've had some of our members, just a handful, go to training. One was at Green Lake. There's going to be another one the last weekend in April. But this is a very comprehensive, wonderful way to bring a lot of this information to your churches. But we say in our social principles that we should educate people of all ages about sexuality, but we didn't have a program that we have adopted as a church. I put in a petition to General Conference in 2024, and it's now at the Discipleship Ministry, and they're working on that. Dr. Warren is the Director of Equity at the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel School of Applied Sciences at Case Western Reserve. She's a trainer for our United Church of Christ, Our Whole Lives Sexuality Curriculum, and she served for the UUA and UCC at the national level and is a lecturer, author, and educator, including teaching master's level advanced policy and advocacy at UW Green Bay. She is thrilled for the United Methodist Church to welcome all of God's children and loves consulting with congregations to create welcoming communities. Please welcome Dr. Sherry Warren. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I am just so excited to be here, and I am thrilled with this opportunity. I'm so proud of Wisconsin. I'm so proud of the United Methodist Church. Thank you, Pastor Izzy, for setting up such a wonderful history of what has taken place within the United Methodist movement. And thank you, Kathy, for inviting me to be here today. I noticed there was a question in the chat and no one has answered it yet. And I don't know who it was directed to necessarily, but I want to try to answer it a little bit. Amy out of Manitowoc asked, there are some individuals in our congregation who might, probably will, make hurtful remarks, even though our congregation wants to be affirming. Can we still welcome people? Amy and everyone, I say absolutely yes. With the right processes to call people in instead of calling people out when we make mistakes, and the appropriate education, we know that we will continue to make mistakes. We're human. God made us perfectly imperfect. And that's the way I like us. It gives us the chance to practice learning together, giving grace to each other, and always striving for more. So by continuing to do educational events like these that have a focus on justice and who it is you want to be in the world, this will help. We can talk later, and I'm sure Kathy has some suggestions as well about how to do more education that is appropriate for full congregations. And your Reconciling Ministries program has so many resources. So please turn to those. Please support Reverend Izzy and the work of Reconciling Ministries, and continue to acknowledge that being human is complicated, imperfect, and yet when we speak with love, people hear that. So I hope that helps Amy with some understanding. It's never going to be perfect. We're never going to all say the same things the right way or the most right way in the moment, particularly in a landscape that is constantly shifting. So thank you for asking that and allowing me a chance to address that. I'm here today to talk a little bit more about some of the language of welcoming God's beloved and diverse community of humanity. The breadth of diversity in the creation of humanity is absolutely exciting to me, and yet I realize it is terrifying to many people. We're scared we're going to mess up, so we don't participate. We are unsure what is the most current set of language. We are fearful that we're going to hurt someone's feelings. We're also scared sometimes that welcoming people into our communities who have different ideas are going to change our communities. But the church has always been a dynamic and changing and organic creature. And we can help shape that and create spaces that truly do welcome and see every single one of God's children. So thanks for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I have a little bit of PowerPoint to orient folks. I also want to let you know that Kathy sent out some really fantastic resources to you, some glossaries of terms that are going to be incredibly helpful today and into the future. So let me get this shared. Come on. At work, I am blessed with 3 monitors. At home, I have 1. So here we are. As I said, I am so excited to be with you today. I was at Pride in the Clee, as we call it around here in Northeast Ohio. I was working for the United Church of Christ's National Ministries last year as the Minister for Women's and Gender Justice. And while I was at Pride, so many United Methodist ministers and members came by, and there were a lot of tears shed together. There were tears of joy. They were tears of sadness. They were tears of grief. There's a lot of feelings tied up in the decision that you all made. And we know that when we have a personal breakup, it hurts, even when we know it is for the best. One of my Unitarian Universalist ministry friends once told me, you know, Sherry, surgery is one pathway to health. And I have tried to remember that sometimes that is what is needed. I understand the complications and confusion around language, such as what is the difference between gender and sex? What are all these different things that people are calling themselves these days? I just can't follow it all. Please help. Well, I'm here to provide a little bit more information, and I am not a biologist. I am a social worker, professor, clinician, but I have studied quite a bit around gender and sexuality. And as Kathy said, I'm one of the trainers representing both the United Church of Christ and the Unitarian Universalist Association in the curriculum that they have co-authored, Our Whole Lives. And I'll talk a little bit more about it later. I just want you to know that most of what I'm sharing today comes straight out of the Our Whole Lives curricula. So, sex and gender, often used interchangeably, different concepts. To clarify a little bit, sex is something that is biological, and we usually talk about it in the binary, male or female. There's also a category called intersex, which means that there are characteristics of both male and female in the organism that we are talking about. We can be talking about humans. We can be talking about other animals. We can talk about plants. We can even get down to cells. And there is still sex associated in many instances with those. Often how we talk about sex is when children are born and we want to know, what is it? What is it? We're so excited. What is it? How big is it? I always think that how big is it is an interesting question. we want to know, is it a boy or a girl? Well, our data shows us that in as many as 2% of all births of humans on the planet, that there is what is called ambiguous genitalia. And we can't actually tell by looking what the sex of the child is. We don't just start pulling blood and immediately look for chromosomal identification when we have babies. And some people say they want it, well, it's a simplification, and I totally understand the desire for simplification. They say, well, two X sex chromosomes means a girl, and an X and a Y means a boy. But it's not always that simple. I don't want to turn this into a biology lesson because a lot of people would probably like be re-traumatized by some sort of science class they took at one point. But chromosomes don't always work right. They don't always replicate themselves and then migrate correctly. They can mutate, and certain parts of them can be turned on by hormones and other chemical reactions, and certain parts of them are turned off. And so science is working incredibly hard to try to understand this more. We're getting there. I don't know if we'll ever get there. I don't know if I care if we ever get there. I'm one of those people who likes a little mystery in life. But often we talk about sex based on chromosomes, hormones, genes, anatomy, and they do not always necessarily reflect what we think they do. Now, when we talk about gender, we're talking about a concept that has been constructed or made, created by humanity, and it is absolutely unique to humans. If giraffes or snakes have a gender, we haven't figured out how they communicate that to each other necessarily yet. Gender is multifaceted and very complex, and it is on a continuum. So whereas we talk about sex as being a binary of male and female, gender is on a continuum that can include words like man, woman, transgender, agender, non-binary. These are different ways that people identify because gender is how we feel and how we engage with society, and it can change. It's very political. It involves roles that are assigned to us when we're very young, and those can be culturally different. There are psychological components to gender, and it's a very social construction. So often when we're talking about people's pronouns, which you've probably heard some, and you probably noticed that I actually identify mine as she and hers. Those are listed on my Zoom profile. She, her, he, his, her, and him. And sometimes people will say, oh, you can call me she, they. What that means is that you can use singular they, which as a writer, that really kind of gets under my skin at times as far as how I conjugate my verbs and so on. But we use they as a singular, and when we study language, we can see that we have for a long, long time in numerous languages. So gender is very much specific to an environment that can be influenced by all of these other things over here on the right box: ethnicity, race, social structures, culture, politics, and so on. I understand you're probably going to have a lot of questions as we have this conversation. Again, I want to turn you to some of the wonderful resources that you were provided. The glossary of terms from Reconciling Ministries Network is really thorough and wonderful, as it explains, what do all these different things mean? I'm so confused. What do you mean there's sexual orientation and that is something outside of sex and gender? We're going to get there. Trust me. In the Our Whole Lives curriculum, which By the way, congratulations on starting to use that and starting to make that part of your ministries. I am so happy for you. It is the most wonderful, inclusive, justice-focused sexuality education curriculum printed in English. And I am so proud to be associated with it. In the Our Whole Lives curriculum, we talk about the SIEO model of sexual identities. So part of that model is understanding biological sex, female, male, and intersex. Now, just a little bit about intersex. This is what I was talking about, often is associated with ambiguous genitalia. And in the past, when babies were born that had ambiguous genitalia, they often were very soon shuttled to a clinic that no longer is open to do this, to be anatomically and surgically changed into what looked like female genitalia, because that was considered the easiest surgical method at the time. We are starting to put the brakes on that process a little bit and let children develop a little bit more physically and emotionally. Some families are trying to raise their children regardless of how they are assigned a sex at birth, which is the language we use, assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth. Trying to let them have their hormones develop and identify a little bit more and raise them without any sort of sexual identification and without gender roles. And many of the parents that are doing this or caregivers that are doing this find that there is so much sex and gender immersed in US culture that their children pick up these roles very quickly anyway, regardless of how much they avoid them at home. The I part of this model refers to identity. I'm going to give you an example in a moment here, but identity is one of those parts that I was talking about. This is how I identify. I happen to identify as a woman. I was also assigned female at birth, and that makes me cisgender. Cis comes to us, I think it's Latin. We borrowed it from chemistry, and cis means the same. So my gender identity, or how I feel inside my head and body, matches my biological sex. So I'm cisgender. Now, transgender, often shortened to trans, means that the gender identity of a person does not necessarily match their biological sex they were assigned at birth. So some of the language that is used around gender identity is transgender or trans, transsexual, although that word has been used for a long time to cause harm to people. And so it's one we kind of avoid, although some people do identify with it. A lot of folks are using genderqueer or queer in general to refer to not only their sexual orientation, but also how they identify their gender. And for many of us, hearing that word queer sends ripples down our spines because we were taught that that was a horrible word that we never wanted to be called and that we only used in specific instances. It was slang that was meant to harm people for a long time. And as we're seeing with a lot of marginalized populations, they are claiming these words back and redefining them in ways that are empowering rather than words that are used to harm. Third gender is also another concept that we will hear about. Two-spirit is used in a lot of indigenous languages around the world. And there's a handful of others, some of which I think are referred to in some of your resources that were given to you before the conference today. I've worked with many younger people, millennials, who are probably considered like 30 to 45 currently, and Gen Z, a little bit younger than that, and then Alpha, even younger than them, who are in their coming of age process currently, who refer to themselves as trans non-binary. What most of them mean, and usually you just kind of have to ask, oh, how do those words give you meaning? Trans non-binary, for folks I have asked, means they identify their gender as trans in that it is different from what they were assigned a sex as at birth. But non-binary in that this idea that there is within gender identity only man and woman, that doesn't work for them. For them, it's a much more complex continuum. And so trans non-binary is one that I was like, do those words go together? Well, when I asked, they do. Gender expression is how we present ourselves. And again, I'm going to give you an example in a moment. I guess I identify as feminine. I don't know. I'm wearing kind of a girly scarf today and I have earrings, but so do a lot of men and non-binary folks. Some people present themselves as in an androgynous way. And I am thinking back to if you all ever saw Pat on Saturday Night Live, the whole skit of the Pat joke was everyone wanted to try to figure out what gender Pat was. And Pat spoke in ways that made it so that no one could tell. Drag kings and drag queens are somewhat of an entertainment way of presenting oneself, but also an identity. Butch and femme are other ways that people express their gender. And then sexual orientation has to do with who we are attracted to or even who we want to be in relationship with. And those relationships can look like a lot of different things. Just to give you an idea of how deep we could go, the Our Whole Lives curriculum for middle school, which is designed for 7th through 9th grade, is a full year of sessions. And understanding of gender roles, sexual orientation, sexuality is not at all the whole curriculum, but it is large pieces of it because this is so inherent to who we are, how we love, and how we are in relationship with everyone around us. So here's the example I wanted to share with you. This is our gender unicorn. The gender unicorn expresses their gender identity. So we're going to look at this little rainbow here, gender identity. The rainbow is connected to the unicorn's mind. This is how unicorn identifies. Unicorn can identify as a woman, as a man, as another gender, and all of these things at once, or none of these things at once. This act as if this little black dot can slide around on these things. And so there are times where people would probably say, I am looking, well, I've had my hair very, very short in my life. People thought I was a boy a lot of my life, or even when I had long hair, I had it tucked up under a hat because it was hot. And I presented often as a boy, but my identity was always that of a girl. Now, if we hop down here to gender expression, this green color is supposed to line up with these green dots over here, signifying all of our unicorn. So gender expression, or how this unicorn expresses its gender. And here again, we have a spectrum of ways to express ourselves. Often I'm very feminine or traditionally female looking, but I'm the one who does all the yard work at our house and most of the repairs on our home while my husband is in the kitchen baking. And this confuses a lot of people, but that's just who we are. And we don't feel that we have to adhere to traditional gender roles, nor do we express our genders in what would be considered traditional ways. Now, the sex assigned at birth of our unicorn is focused on DNA, and it's right down here where a lot of the reproductive organs would be on our gender unicorn. Sex assigned at birth is generally, probably for unicorns, but especially for humans, either female, male, or often there's a category called other or intersex that are often used interchangeably, meaning, you know what? There's some labia possibly, but there's also something that kind of looks like a penis, and we're not sure. Sometimes it's just swelling that happens from the trauma of a baby being born. And after a little while, things become more clear. But that is not always the case. Then we talk about orientation. And here for our gender unicorn, orientation is broken down into two different domains or facets, but there are more than these. So this refers to our unicorn's loving heart, who they are physically attracted to, which could be men, could be women, could be other ways that people identify. Then the red refers to who they are emotionally attracted to. And perhaps you never thought about these things being two different concepts. For many people, they are. I had a student once in a human sexuality class who identified as aromantic, and I mean not a space romantic, but all run together, like not romantic, aromantic, heterosexual. How did she go? Aromantic. She had a complex identity where she was romantically attracted to all kinds of people. It didn't matter how they presented or what their gender expression or identity was. But then she only wanted to be in relationships. So she was more emotionally attracted to women. And this was woven throughout the fabric of who she was. You will hear sometimes, and you'll see some of these words in your glossaries, pansexual. Pansexual is one way that a lot of folks are identifying their orientation. Pan meaning wide, all of, more than one. Pansexual meaning that they are attracted to people regardless of how those people identify, or to multiple different ways of identifying and expressing one's gender. You will see in one of your other resources, there's asexual. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, asexual is a word that is used to describe people who really don't think that they're sexually attracted to anyone necessarily. It is an orientation and an identity. They engage in loving relationships if they choose to. They may participate in intimately sexual relationships if they choose to, but they do not identify as someone who is sexually attracted to others. Now, I realize this is complex and confusing. I am going to urge you to use your resources and continue learning and studying this vocabulary. I also want to remind you the vocabulary changes. Even just 15 years ago, queer was not a word that you heard very often. And now, with a younger generation really embracing that word and using it to empower themselves, we're seeing things like queer ministries and queer therapy groups, and people are using it as a verb to queer the church. We are queering society. So I realize that that still might be a word that has been traumatizing. I'm going to ask you to lean in to the discomfort and try to sit with it and learn about it. I'm looking at some of your other resources here. I see biphobia, homophobia. Phobia, of course, is a fear. Homophobia is a fear of people who identify as homosexual, which homosexual is more of a clinical word that gets used. Often gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual, pansexual, etc. get used. So even when you hear the alphabet of letters come out of someone's mouth that have to do with what we call the LGBTQ plus umbrella, those letters are often L, lesbian, G, gay, which some women or other folks identify with, but is often referring to gay men. L referring to women who are generally in relationship with other women as far as the life intimate relationships go. LGB, bisexual. Biphobia means a fear of people who identify as bisexual. And there has been a lot of discrimination against people who identify as bisexual from both the gay and lesbian communities, as well as the heterosexual, often referred to as straight communities. Heterosexual being people who are attracted to the opposite gender in that they identify as one and they identify other people as the other, and they stick with that binary. A lot of folks have often said, can't you just choose? And so rather than bisexual, some people are using pansexual to mean that it's even more increased. But let me go back to our alphabet of letters. L, G, B, those are all about orientations. And then somewhere along the way, the T got tossed in there for transgender, which is not about an orientation. So it gets even more confusing. We're putting people's sexual orientation and people's gender identity under the same umbrella. And that was done intentionally by folks who identify as those populations because they were often confused and lumped together already. And so they found power through numbers and community. So that's LGBT. Q usually refers to queer, which can refer to someone's identity or their orientation. Sometimes we see a second Q, which is questioning, or we'll even see a question mark in there. And that means someone's figuring it out. They're not quite set yet on how they want to identify. They're waiting to see how they develop, perhaps, and figure out, I always joke, what we want to be when we grow up. I'm in my 50s and I have finally figured out, at least career-wise, what I think I want to be when I grow up. So LGBTQ, sometimes you'll hear A, meaning asexual, which is an identity. Sometimes you'll hear I, which refers to intersex usually. And then sometimes we just put the plus sign, meaning there are more identities and letters, but we got to stop at some place. Otherwise, we're singing the alphabet song and it takes too long to actually communicate effectively. So I hope the gender unicorn has been helpful. There's another representation of gender out there that is called the genderbread person, that is like a little gingerbread cookie that has some of these. I prefer to stick with the gender unicorn. The genderbread person has had some issues around copyright and who owns it. And so rather than get myself entangled in that, I'm going to stick with the unicorn. So I'm going to talk about, this is a resource from Our Whole Lives, and I'm going to talk about ways to make your communities more welcoming to transgender people. But I want you to recognize this is not just about transgender people. This is about all people and how we perceive all people. So respecting a person's identity and their own labels that they use to call themselves. You may ask folks to put pronouns on their name tags in your congregations. This is something that people can do to show support, regardless of how they identify. It's not something we want to force upon people, though. Single stall bathrooms with no identity other than they are a restroom for people to use can be very helpful and welcoming. Using the correct language, such as bisexual, gay, transgender. And I want to make a note, it is not transgendered as if something has been verbed upon a person. It's transgender. It doesn't necessarily fit with how we normally think of the English language, but that's the word that it is. So someone is transgender. And we don't make any kind of assumptions about anybody's gender identity or their orientation, regardless of how they present themselves. We also need to consider, is any of that really my business? Do I need to know that in order to engage with this person in my community? So one other thing that I hear a lot of transgender folks say is they're only ever asked about transgender stuff. There's so much more than that. They're humans. They've had wonderful experiences of the world and they have all kinds of thoughts, just like everyone else does. So let's not assume that just because someone identifies as transgender, they're some sort of expert on being transgender, or that they want to talk about that all the time. When we include them in different ministries that we have in our congregations, we do that because we want to know about their interests and what their energy is around. When we talk to groups of people, we try to use words that don't assign gender to people or that are narrow in scope. So, hey, kiddos, come on, children. Welcome, friends. Folks, it's good to see you this morning. I'm not from the South, although I'm a Kansan, and some people would say that is the South, but it is not. I still say all y'all because it's very inclusive and it has no gender associated with it. Whenever you are asking these things on forms, be real clear about why you need to know that. And if you need to know that, ask for gender, not sex, and make sure that there are options for people to not answer that or be something other than man or woman. And this last piece, I am going to refer to one of our Whole Lives curriculum writers, CB Beal, who runs Justice and Peace Consulting. CB talks about preemptive radical inclusion, meaning assume that every diversity is already present in your community and be using language that acknowledges that and welcomes that. People listen for those cues or those clues. And so let's assume that we have every way a person could identify within our community already and do our best to let them know that they are welcome there. Now, if you're like, okay, Sherry, I've got that down. I got that down pat. What's next? Here's some advanced actions. Ask questions about transgender issues after you've gotten to know someone. Include transgender people in the different ways that you do your ministries. If you're having a panel about raising children, do you have transgender people in your community who are raising children? Let's make sure we include them in ways that recognize all of the gifts and identities that they bring to your communities. Let's talk with our children about being transgender and including transgender identity in the ways we talk with them. Talk about the ways that you grew up and what kind of roles you experienced within communities such as congregations and within family. Go through your policies in your congregations and make sure that they are what I would call inclusive and expansive, to be inclusive of all identities. Give yourself some grace and realize that all of us are still on a learning path. And learning about gender is really a lifelong process. We try not to divide groups into boys or girls or men and women. And I understand here we are at a women's women in faith organization. But I feel like I actually saw some men who or some people who were expressing themselves in a more masculine way. So while we want at times to focus on the needs of people specifically by their sex or gender, let's make sure that we're letting everyone know they are welcome and that they have a role as participants and allies in much of the work that we do. Start experimenting by not asking the gender of children. What would that be like if we just said, oh, congratulations, this is wonderful. What's their name? Or how are you all settling in? And worry less about how this child is going to be identified. Here's an experiment you can try. When you refer to people by pronoun, try to not use a pronoun at all and just use their name. It can make language sound a little clunky at times, but it is really interesting to recognize the shift in ourselves and those around us when we avoid the use of pronouns, or if we refer to everyone as a singular they instead of as a he, her, hers, his. I want to put a little caveat on that. Well, maybe not a caveat, a corollary, whatever. I want to add something to that. I don't know how God gets referred to quite as much in the United Methodist Church. I come from a UCC, a Unitarian Universalist background, and within both of those movements, there is often a lot of conversation about how do we refer to the ultimate reality, as the UUs might say, or of a God, of the spirit of the universe, all these different ways. To where when I was in my UCC congregation in Green Bay, we would often change the lyrics of a song so that it was no longer he, it was they, or even a word such as spirit or universe rather than a pronoun at all. In the Lord's Prayer every Sunday, there was this introduction that acknowledged, instead of just starting with the Lord's Prayer as our Father, it was often framed as, and let us pray in the way that Jesus taught us for our mother and our Father who art in heaven. And that was when I knew I had found a home for myself. That, and when one of the first sermons I experienced there was entitled God is Queer. When that got kind of hollered by our slightly radical female minister, not a ripple went through the congregation. I think I probably tensed up and went, oh, what is she doing? What is she saying? Oh, people are going to gasp. There was no gasping. There was total acceptance of, we trust Reverend Bridget to bring us through this conversation. So let's hear what she has to say. So she talked about such an expansive concept of God, that God would have to be queer in order to have created so many wonderfully diverse ways of being. I also want to ask you to start paying attention to what's going on. I know you are big advocates legislatively, but what's going on locally in your communities around housing, around restroom laws, around school boards making changes, whether it's about sports or who uses the restroom or what kind of words can be used, such as having to actually call classes of young people boys and girls and leaving no room for anything else. So I'm going to ask you to pay attention to those kinds of things in your community. Now, those list of 10 basic actions and 10 advanced actions are from the Our Whole Lives curricula, as I said, but I have my own bonus action based on my experience. And this, again, happened when I was living in Green Bay and a member of Union UCC. We had a reaffirmation of baptism for a transgender person who was living into who she felt she needed to be. And it was one of the most powerful, loving moments where God was truly present that I have ever seen. It was amazing. I don't think there was a dry eye in the sanctuary for that event. We had reached out, this was before I worked for the National Ministries of the United Church of Christ, and we had reached out to some national staff and said, do you have any thoughts? Do you have any resources? What can we do to make this happen? And they said, we don't know, and share when you figure it out, share with us. Well, it's not the answer we hoped for, but we had really loving, wise people in our community who figured out with the person who was being reaffirmed in her baptism what she needed in order to feel that she had been accepted by God and committed to God in the way that she was living her life true to herself in that moment. I would be happy to connect you with Reverend Bridget if you are interested in that process. It probably lives way back on, oh, you know what? It was pre-pandemic, so I don't know that it lives way back on Facebook. I don't know that we were broadcasting services at that point, but I know that Bridget would be elated to talk with folks about that specific event. I want to pause right here. Something keeps kind of popping up on my screen, so I want to see if there's anything in the chat, if people are asking questions that I need to address in this moment. Kathy, how are we?
Yes, there are some questions.
Okay, I'm going to stop share then. I'm going to look at the questions. Okay. The science is fascinating. Oh, nice. National Geographic had a good special. Again, it's incredibly complex and it involves a lot of specific conditions for chemical reactions to take place. Kathy, being a medical doctor, I've always been curious how much she learned about this. Not that that makes her a genetics expert, but how much our medical doctors actually spend learning about the migration and movement of hormones and genetic material and so on. I do find it really fascinating. Let's see here. Oh, I'm glad. Is Cargo a place?
Yes, Janesville.
Thank you. That sounds great. I'm glad you're enjoying things. Wonderful.
There was a question that didn't get answered at the end of the break. Could someone speak to the positive, negative impact of flying a rainbow flag outside their church?
Ah, okay. I'm not seeing that. I can speak to it, but I'm curious what our community has experienced with regard to that.
I can tell you in Elm Grove, where our church is, we can only put signs out on the street twice a year, I think it is. There's like a regulation. But right now we have an Easter flag out. But it took me 7 years to get our United Methodist Open Hearts, Open Minds, Open Doors banner that someone donated, moved out of a back room to our narthex. There was fear that that would turn people away or make them angry. And we did have a significant transfer of membership prior to, when all the discussion was happening about the change of the Constitution at the United Methodist Church. So we know that there has been a lot of harm and a lot of separation in churches and in the United Women in Faith groups, which, the relationships were hurt in some ways. But I go to different cities regularly and look for a church when I'm there. And if there's a flag, I will go there. When I was in Nashville recently, I went to Belmont in downtown Nashville. So I go to places where I want to experience that because it's not in my church. However, we do have one Reconciling Church in Wauwatosa, in Waukesha, Madison, and as people have already mentioned, on Alaska. So one of the questions on our survey is your church reconciling? Because I want to get a feel for that. But the flag, what do you think?
Well, I see Lisa said a lesbian couple joined because they saw the rainbow flag at their church.
Right.
It's such a perfect symbol.
Yes.
And I'm going to show one here in a moment when I go back to my slides, but I just wanted to check in with everyone. College students definitely
Mhm.
notice.
I know our Waukesha School Board has been very contentious, and a teacher cannot have a rainbow anything in their room. So it's very, you're right to bring up the school boards. The school boards are very influential and can be very harmful.
Well, and politically speaking, school boards were one of the ways that the Koch brothers of Koch Industries were able to start infiltrating politics with conservatism in the form of the Tea Party, which has since somewhat transformed into the MAGA movement.
Or Christian nationalism.
Yes, related to Christian nationalism for sure. That is very much one of the goals of the Koch brothers.
Yeah.
And that's Koch, Koch brothers. As a Kansan, and they are from Kansas, very much aware of their influence in nationwide politics. Feather flag, nice. Okay, I'm gonna hop back in. We've got about 5 more minutes, and I got a couple more things I want to make sure you know about before Kathy starts to wrap things up. Okay. All right. I wanted to give a plug for Our Whole Lives. I know that as a conference, you are moving towards this, but I want to give you a little bit of information in case you don't have it. Here are 2 links where you can go learn more about it from the denominations that own and work on the constant updating of the curricula, the UUs and the United Church of Christ folks. So many decades ago, there was a curriculum that the UUs ran called About Your Sexuality, AYS. And it was a very progressive, inclusive sexuality curriculum. And they eventually partnered with the UCC, got some funding from the Ford Foundation, and started to update and formalize this curriculum. It is called Our Whole Lives. We often call it OWL because Our Whole Lives is long and owls are cute. It is really about our whole lives. We recognize the gift of sexuality and identity as things that God created in us. And these are pieces of us that exist for our entire lifespan, not just at some point when we are sexually developing or reproducing to grow our families. So the Our Whole Lives curriculum starts young with kindergarten and first grade and has a focus on that point as at understanding bodies, where babies come from, and safety, really. It's a focus on health and safety and starting to understand what it's like to be in relationship, be that with our families, our healthcare professionals, our friends, the folks at our church. Then we have curriculum that is designed developmentally for 4th through 6th graders. Now, we would not encourage anyone to ever run a class of 4th through 6th graders together. Either do each of those grade levels alone, or 4th and 5th together, or 5th and 6th together. 4th through 6th is developmentally too broad of an expanse to try to help those young people have a positive learning experience. We then move up to middle school, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, and again, generally not all three of those together, too broad of an expanse of developmental needs. We often are in small congregations though, and we have to do what we have to do. When you send people to facilitator training, they learn a lot about how to implement this within their own context so they can figure out, how do I partner with other congregations? How do I make this work for the age group of people that we have in our community? We then have a high school session, 10, 11, 12, which is shorter than the middle school. The middle school is the long one that I was talking about, takes most of a year. High school focuses a little bit on, again, let's learn about the biology of humanity in case you haven't yet. It's kind of a review, but then let's focus more on what does it mean to be a responsible, respectful person in relationship with others, all kinds of relationships. We then move into 3 different adult curricula. There's a young adult, so people who are somewhat more focused on perhaps finding a partner and growing their families. One that is just considered adult, which is often a sandwiched generation of raising children who are young up to becoming young adults themselves and caring for aging parents. And then there's an older adult curriculum designed for folks who are experiencing the changes that come with our lives once we get older and we're done with our reproducing days and we take on a different role in our families and our communities. So it is phenomenal that we name that the gift of sexuality from God is present in us our entire lifespan, and that we try to help people learn and understand what does that mean for them. Now, lastly, I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that there are advocacy concerns to be addressed. This is a flag that is considered like the most inclusive LGBTQ plus friendly flag. The rainbow flag incorporated with the trans flag colors, which are the pink, blue, and white. The purple and yellow refer to intersex and inclusion. The black and brown were added a few years ago, referencing the numerous ways that we come as people with a variety of skin colors. I think that actually came out of Philadelphia first. And then I also want to make sure that I share some of the resources that are Wisconsin specific. And Kathy, I think you have these links to share.
I'm gonna share some in my slides too, and I will send those out because I don't have them in the resources that went out already. So
Okay, fantastic. I was hoping there'd be a follow-up.
yeah, there will.
I want you to know about HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, big nationwide organization that has state-specific sections. I want you to know about Fair Wisconsin, which has a beautiful website with a specific legislation section. I also want you to know about PFLAG, which is an organization that has been around for decades. It's got some old-fashioned language because it's parents and friends of lesbians and gays. And this was really when we were only talking about people who were lesbians and gays. People weren't identifying much beyond that. So it's a wonderful ally network. One of the best things I have found in Wisconsin is the Movement Advancement Project. And again, Kathy's going to share all of these links with you. This one is phenomenal for actually talking about and rating Wisconsin's equality profile and how it is doing as a state. So I know we're out of time. I could talk to you all day about this. Maybe someday I will come and we'll hang around and have coffee and I will talk to you all day about this. As long as you give me some cheese curds, I am happy to be there. It's been a real pleasure to be with you. And thanks again, Kathy, for having me. Ah, ooh, I really want to address Kelly Fowler's question that sexuality education confuses children. Children know from a very young age who they are internally. You heard Reverend Izzy talk about this in his own experience. We know that children as young as 3 and 4 years old have already figured out their orientation and their gender identity. Seldom has education ever actually caused people to engage with the knowledge that they are learning in unhealthy ways. And when Our Whole Lives is offered, it is comprehensive. Caregivers and parents are included and considered to be the main sexuality educators for their children. And we also occasionally joke it's not a lab class. So parents are encouraged to participate in different ways to make sure that they are brought along with this education. So thanks for asking that.
There's a great video, and while you were talking, I was trying to find the name of it. I will send that out as well. It talks about those pre-adolescents around the 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old group where there's questioning, where it's okay to question, that this is a normal process. And it doesn't mean you're going to go one way or the other. You can't talk somebody into it. But it was a very helpful video for us. We have an 11-year-old grandchild who was our granddaughter, and now uses pronouns they, them. And it's really hard. We have 7 children and 9 grandchildren to suddenly stop saying she. So you're right. We use first name more often because we don't want to make a mistake, but they are very understanding of that. And so as long as you're making the effort, that's what's important. And it's okay if they correct us, but and the parents correct us. And we are trying, we're just used to being binary, but I have a lot of friends in every category that you've already discussed. And the more you get to know about this, the more comfortable we all get. So don't be afraid to keep learning and practicing your language.
Absolutely, Kathy. Well said. First United Methodist in Madison is sharing a picture from their building of their flag.
Oh, nice.
Yes, they sometimes get torn down. Yes, we put them right back up. So thank you again, Kathy.
You're very welcome. And I am so grateful for you. I know you've moved a number of times, different places, work, in different states, different communities, and different jobs. So I just really love the wealth of diverse background that you have. And I've appreciated you as a facilitator trainer. Again, I will put some information about the Our Whole Lives training. And we'll keep working on that in our conference. You do have to have 2 facilitators for every group. I hope every one of your churches has a safer sanctuary policy. So 2 years ago, we had safe sanctuary. Now there was an update for safer sanctuary, and it's available online. You can order it. But that requires that we have 2 people, unrelated, different, well, I don't know, I guess it would be different genders. And so we have to, be very familiar with that in our churches when we're talking about these very sensitive issues.